Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in the seminars at EBD. Here we have today Gema Trigo. She's a postdoc. Well, she's an associate professor at the Museum and Institute of Zoology in Poland, in Warsaw, and she's visiting with Jim Cerda for a year. She did her PhD at the University of Cordoba with Joaquin Reyes, and she is going to give us a wonderful talks about ants and urbanization. When you want, Gema, you can start.
Okay, thank you very much, Maria Jose, for the introduction. Oh no, I cannot connect the screen now. Can you see the screen, the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So today I'm going to talk about the anthropization, pest invasions, urban ecology, and of course ants. The urban habitats, it was the main topic of the topic of my PhD thesis, and I really like it because I think that nowadays it's very important to increase our knowledge about anthropic habitats and the consequences of on our biodiversity and natural conservation. So I keep working on that nowadays. And I wanted to show that, oh, sorry, I cannot show you the upper part of the screen. Okay, doesn't matter. So anthropization is the changes in the natural habitats or natural environments by the different human activities. These transformations in the habitat show or causes different changes in the habitat, resulting in the deforestation, changes in the habitat features, like changes in the temperature and humidity. The most drastic change is the urbanization, and there is also one increase of the temperatures by the urban heat island effect and the climate change. And all of this also causes changes in our biodiversity, and these changes are one, biodiversity loss, changes in the species assemblages, and also favors the spread of pest, alien, and invasive species. And finally, it can also lead local extinctions. So I wanted to talk about anthropization from different levels. And the first part was talking about the pests. Well, in this context, I wanted to talk about the role of wood ants in the forest immunity systems. And in this topic, in this research, we use two main factors, or two main, sorry, I forgot the word now. We have two main group of organisms, the boring beetles and the ants. So the boring beetles are a group of beetles which are laying the eggs under the barks of the trees, usually the dead or weak trees. And the larvae are developing under the bark, feeding in the woods, and contributing with these actions to the nutrient cycles and the degradation of the woods. But some anthropic activities and some anthropic factors, such as the increase of the temperatures and also the management practices like the clear cutting, are leading to an explosion of their population. And here we have a problem because this outstanding number of boring beetles constitute one pest in our European forest, mostly in coniferous and the mixed forest. The main groups of beetles considered pest species here in Europe are the longhorn beetles, the jewel beetles, and the most dangerous one, the real bark beetle, Ipsa species. So the second component of our studies are the wood ants. These wood ants, in our study, we use are a group of species, and we use the Formica polyctena, are sharing the habitat with the bark beetles or the boring beetles. And they are also in this coniferous and mixed forest in Europe. But in this case, they are endangered by the same anthropogenic factors, this increase of temperatures, and also this clear cutting or habitat loss. These species are building polydomic systems with different nests connected among them. This is one foraging trail connecting different nests. And they have a very high production. So with this system, they are covering a very large area within the forest. And since they have this huge nest with a huge production, they need a huge, they need to get a huge amount of proteins in their diet. And part of these proteins are collecting from depredation on the small arthropods, among others. So taking into account that they are sharing the habitat and they are preying on arthropods, and usually they are going to prey on the most abundant arthropods that they will find, we hypothesize that the redwood ants, with their intensive and extensive foraging activity, can be very important in this ecosystem functioning, and they can play one important role as a pest control, and especially in this pest beetle species. So in other words, a higher abundance of the Formica polyctena might lead to a healthier forest because they will decrease the tree infestation by the boring beetles, but also fungi infestations, because these beetles are also bringing some fungus to these infested trees by their larvae. The first part was to check if we have some inner characteristic of the forest that can contribute or facilitate the infections by the different boring beetles, or by the different boring beetles or by the fungal infestation. And we check if the latitude, the altitude, or the average forest age was helping or facilitating the infestation by the different pest groups. But we didn't find any correlation. So once we felt safe with this first step, we check different biotic and abiotic factors that can interact with this or can be linked to this infestation. And we saw that among all of them, the perimeter of the trees, ratio of alive and standing trees, and also the ratio of conifers, as well as the nest volume and the nest frequency of the wood ants, the nest number of wood ants, the ratio of alive trees, and the perimeters of the trees were significantly linked to this infestation degree in our forest. So we check how it's working, this nest number and the infestation by the bark beetles. And as a result, as main results, we saw that both the proportion of infested trees by all the pest species or pest groups, the boring beetles and the fungal infestation, and the most important part, the most dangerous bark beetle, or the most dangerous threat against our forest ecosystems, they both were decreasing while increasing the number of Formica polyctena in our forest, or the presence, let's say. But there was another question. Not all the nests were of the same size, so we wanted to know if there was some relationship between the nest size of Formica polyctena and the number of nests. And we saw that the nest size was decreasing while increasing the number of nests. So in these circumstances, we wanted to know if also the nest size is playing some role in this infestation. But we saw that we didn't find any correlation between the degree of infestation by the different boring beetles and the fungus, and also with the nest size. And thinking about it, it is very logic, because when the ants are foraging, when these Formica polyctena are foraging, they are covering a certain surface close at the surrounding of the nest. And the larger nest, of course, is covering a larger surface, but it won't be never as big as a polydomous system where different nests distant between them are connected and they are covering a much larger surface of the forest. So our study highlight the importance of developing the conservation plans and trying to slow down or to eradicate if possible, but it's not possible, all of these management practices that endanger, represent a danger or a threat to our native redwoods, because they are really playing a very important role in the forest conservation, and they can be considered very important and useful tools in developing this biocontrol pest species plans. Well, when we are talking about anthropization, it's not possible not to think about the invasions. Invasive species are 100% connected to or linked to the anthropic activities. These species usually arrive to new locations as a result of the anthropogenic, as a result of these human traits, and they are establishing their populations in those very changed habitats or more artificial habitats like the urban areas. So I'm going to trade or to talk about the invasions from two different points. The first one, when we have invasive species that are changing our habitat and are leading changes in our ant communities, and of course in some other arthropods communities, and from the point of view when our ants are the invasive species. Well, the first thing is to talk about what is one invasive species. This is one alien species that causes different damages and other organisms in human health or facilities. Like, for example, I put here some examples like the Solidago. This is one plant that was introduced in Europe with one ornamental purpose, and nowadays is a very successful and widespread invasive species. Here we see how some invasive idole ant species are attacking this chicken, or a very well-known Solenopsis invicta, which leads very strong allergic reaction in humans. And finally, how the Lasius neglectus is infesting the different facilities and causing damages in their structure. But it's not easy to become an invasive species, and they have to, they need to have some particular, let's say, characteristics, because they have to overcome different barriers, like the new climate conditions and the new habitat features, which are not that strong, or in certain way are easier to overcome in urban habitats or anthropogenic habitats. And also the interspecific competitions, which is not always towards the native species, but sometimes towards some other invasive species that arrive to the same habitat. In the first case, we are going to talk about ants as the victims of the plant invasions. So this is, as I said, the golden rule, one invasive species that is considered one of the most successful invasive species in the world. It is leading changes in the habitat and also in the biodiversity. And in our study, we check how it's working, this invasion in our ant communities at different levels. To do that, we sampled with pitfall traps 5 different habitats at the surrounding of Krakow in Poland. And there were 5 invaded habitats and 5 control habitats. As a result, we saw that there is a different ant assemblages in invaded meadows and non-invaded meadows. But we wanted to know why this or how it is possible. So we also took measurements of the humidity and temperature at the ground, which is the nesting source of our species. And we check also the different species at species level. And we saw that the invaded habitats show a lower humidity, so they are drier. And in our case, we saw also that changes in these ant assemblages are the results of one decrease or drastic decrease or reduction of our Myrmica species in the community, in the ant community present in the Solidago meadows or invaded meadows, and one increase of our Lasius niger. So, well, Myrmica species are species more linked or to humid habitats, whereas the Lasius niger is a generalist species with a higher plasticity and is more resilient to dry habitats. So it's taking advantages of these unsuitable habitats for their competitors, and also is taking advantage of the reduction of the competitors to increase their populations. But not only the environmental factors or these characteristics of the environment are affecting our populations. So we also wanted to know if there is differences in the availability of food, which is one of the main sources for growing our colonies, for establishing our populations. And we saw that the dry mass present in invaded meadows is leading changes or is totally linked to the distribution of our Myrmica ruginodis and Lasius niger. In the case of Myrmica ruginodis in invaded meadows, it's able to grow their populations or is more present in the places where we have a higher dryer mass or higher availability of proteins, whereas we find the opposite situation for Lasius niger. And one more time, this is a result of this one more specialist species, which is trying to reduce the foraging distances to the main food source for their colonies, and the adaptation or the plasticity of our Lasius niger, which is able to colonize other places in another less suitable places within the Solidago meadows, and at the same time, again, is reducing the interspecific competition for the food sources. But as I said before, the invasions are working at different levels. So we were also checking how it's working in the colony production. And we saw that in non-invaded meadows, our colonies were working in a normal way. So the colonies tend to invest in the colony size. So in general, we saw that these colonies present in non-invaded meadows show a higher total production with a higher size or bigger size of their colonies and a higher production of new workers. So they are investing in growing the colonies, in growing the number of workers which will provide a higher amount of different food sources, and also are able to find more suitable places and, of course, establishing better their populations. However, in the case of Solidago meadows, we found that in invaded meadows, the colonies tend to invest in the production of giants. And this is very weird because giants are expensier than the workers. So how is possible, we thought that how it's possible that in a less suitable place where the food sources are reduced, they are investing in a most costly type of in a most expensive caste in our colonies, and we also saw that the production of giants are the last chance for our colonies to fly to other more suitable places and develop their colonies in more suitable places, and in some way ensure the establishing or to ensure their genes in the future generations. So here we see how we wanted to highlight the importance of reducing the introduction of alien species of plants, because of the different, we don't know when one species can be invasive till they arrive to the new habitat and they show their plasticity, or how they are able to adapt and to invade new meadows, but they for sure change our natural habitats, and it leads changes in our communities, and sometimes they are drastic. We have drastic results. But when we are talking, I also saw that we are going to talk about ants as invasive species, not as the victims. And to do that, we carry out one study in which we use the two most invasive species in Europe, the Lasius neglectus and the Linepitemas humile. Lasius neglectus is coming from Asia, and Linepitemas humile is coming from South America. Despite the different origin, they show very similar ecological requirements. They need rather high humidity in the habitats, and they are quite linked to anthropogenic habitats. They are usually present in cities, in urban parks and gardens, and they both are showing high aggressiveness and polydomous system. This is not the first time that it has been studied, these two species or the confrontations. But usually in this behavioral test, people is using a same number of competitors, which in our case, we thought that it's not strictly or it's not too realistic, because it's very the possibility of two species, two alien and invasive species arriving to the same place at the same time is very low. It can happen, of course, but we wanted to simulate a very more realistic situation or a more realistic scenario, and we thought that usually, or in the most common situation, is one species arrive earlier, establish their populations, and then when the second one is arriving, it finds that is in a numerical disadvantage towards the first one arriving. So we had two hypotheses. The first one, that differences in the abundance of the first arrived species determine its success against the other species, but also we thought that there is another possibility, and is that the two species can co-occur by division of the territory. Well, to test it, we collected different colonies. Well, we used different colonies from of Lasius neglectus and Argentine ant. The Lasius neglectus was collected in Poland, in Warsaw, also in Sant Cugat, and here in Gandia. And the Lasius and the Argentine ant were collected in Girona, in Sant Cugat, Seville, and Doñana. Well, this here in Sant Cugat, these both species are present not only in the Sant Cugat, but also in the same habitat, in the same place, in the same location. So they are really co-occurring there, but we don't know how it's going to end up the situation. So to simulate this scenario that I explained before, we made different pairwise comparisons in which one individual of one species was facing up or confronting 5 workers of the other species, of the other invasive species. So we had the hume dominant, which is 1 individual of neglectus versus 5 individuals of Argentine ant, and the opposite situation when the Argentine ant is in numerical disadvantage, which is neck dominant. So our first results or general results show that when the Linepithema humilia is numerically dominant and the Lasius neglectus, one worker of Lasius neglectus is facing up 5 Argentine ants, the confrontations are more aggressive, and actually the general or the group of aggressive behaviors performed by the neglectus was higher than the group of aggressive behaviors carried out or performed by the Argentine ant when it's facing up 5 workers of neglectus. When checking the different individuals' behaviors separately, we also saw that in the case of Argentine ant being one worker facing up 5 of neglectus, she was trying to avoid significantly more times the confrontations versus neglectus. However, when the neglectus was alone, she was performing a larger number of interactions and mostly aggressive interactions. So our neglectus showed a higher number of antenations, so exploring the enemy. And also she was carrying out a larger number of biting and the most aggressive behavior, a larger number of chemical attack. But our main question was, can they coexist? And we had the chance of testing it because we had colonies of neglectus and Argentine ant already co-occurring in San Cugat, and which were already in contact. So we check the different confrontations between colonies coexisting and colonies not coexisting or co-occurring, better this terminology, and when they were numerically subordinate, so one ants, towards the 5 competitors, we saw that in general, the Argentine ant tends to be less aggressive when it's fighting the neglectus, which co-occur in the same habitat she has, and is a bit more aggressive when she doesn't know the other species. But in the case of being alone, she's not having too much interactions. In the case of neglectus, she's very aggressive and is more aggressive when she's facing the enemy that she already knows. In the case of being dominant, numerically dominant, so the group of 5 workers, in the case of the Argentine ant, she is more aggressive, much more aggressive, when she's facing these colonies that never were in contact with them before, that when they know the enemy. And in the case of neglectus, there is not significant results, but she tends to be always more aggressive when she knows the enemy. So it's like she knows the weakness. As a conclusion of our study, we know that the anthropogenic actions or activities are bringing our invasive species to our habitats. And in these anthropogenic habitats, they do not have too much enemies to face up. But when they face up another invasive species, very aggressive, they are not always pushing out the second one, but they are able to show some plasticity in order to survive to the confrontations or to survive to this more aggressive species, like in the case of Argentine ant and neglectus. And the Argentine ant is showing that when she's in numerical disadvantage, she has the strategy of my dear enemy, which ensures the partition of the territory and also the survival. And when they are in a group, they are trying, or they are ensuring the monopolization of the resources, which is also important for their survival, and they are using the bourgeois strategy. So this plasticity allows them to co-occur in the same habitat with another invasive species by the partition of the territory, which results is a very drastic negative impact in our environment. And finally, it's impossible to talk about the anthropization without talking about urbanization, one of the main threats against our nature conservation and also our biodiversity. The big cities are the focal point of work and business, and their population is increasing because many people are moving to the city and looking for new opportunities, labor opportunities. So this is leading one increasing of the city, of the area of the city, and consequently reducing the surrounding natural habitats, which at the same time are the main source for repopulation of our native species that disappear during the construction of the city and the changes in the habitat. In this context, the urban granaries are playing one very important role as refuge for species, but a different type of management are leading or are able to might lead the reduction of the effectiveness of the ecological function because of the reduction of sources. For example, in the urban parks, usually the typical structure of urban parks are very large areas covered by only grass and some stands of bushes or trees with some ornamental function, and many of them are usually exotic plants. So we have one homogenization of the habitats, and also a new the chances of arriving of this leading to these invasions that we were talking before, which is the second part of our problems with the urban granaries. The arrival of invasive species, which will reduce our biodiversity, will push out our native species. And then finally, we have also the urban heat island effect. So in the first study, I was checking the influence of the different type of management in the urban granaries and how it works on the structure of our ant, spider, and harvestmen communities, because ant and spiders are very good bioindicator groups of arthropods, and also with the aim to determine the task required to improve the maintenance and conservation of urban granaries, and also the biodiversity and their ecological function. To do that, I used 3 habitat types: the botanical gardens, the urban parks, and the urban woodlands. And all these habitats were sampled in the city of Warsaw in Poland. So 7 urban parks with different locations within the city, the 2 botanical gardens present in the city, and 2 woodlands, Morrison and Forbema, which are spots of...
Vale, no ha salido en YouTube esto, nuestras dudas de...
No, todavía no, venga. Pues
vale, venga Gema, tú directamente, venga, dale.
Un minuto.
Ah, vale. ¿Dónde está el YouTube? No lo encuentro ahora.
Ya te lo paso.
Ponlo en el chat y así me...
Vale.
Okay, un segundo, a ver. Hola a todos. Está estableciéndose la conexión.
Vale.
Vale, ya estamos de vuelta. Lo siento a todo el mundo. Hemos tenido un problema aquí con la conexión, pero ya estamos de vuelta. Por favor, Gema, puedes continuar. Muchas gracias.
I was talking about the study and these 3 different management of granaries in the city of Warsaw. And after sampling 7 urban parks, 2 botanical gardens, and 2 urban areas, 2 urban woodlands, we collected a total of 34 species of ants, 83 species of spiders, and 11 species of harvestmen, in a total of 440 pitfall traps, but we only collected back 437, 3 were lost somewhere. As a result, we started with our ants, very great bioindicator groups, and we saw that the ant assemblages of our communities were distributed based on the management of our 3 different granaries. And also we saw some differences in the species richness with the higher values or the highest values found in the botanical gardens, one anthropogenic habitat, but with a larger number of microhabitats and with very good management conditions. The second one was the second values or highest values was found in the woodlands, where we find one habitat similar to the natural habitats, and the most suitable for our more specific specialist species. And finally, the lowest values was found in the parks, in the urban parks, these huge areas of grass, where we have one homogenization of the habitat, which allows a lower number of species existing there or inhabiting there. In the urban parks, we also found the Lasius neglectus, only there in urban parks, but never in botanical gardens or woodlands, which is, as I already said, one of the most invasive ant species in Europe. And we also found one individual of Phaidole megacephala in one of the botanical gardens, but further samplings we didn't find them anymore, and it was one isolated individual. When checking or when focusing in the bioindicator character of our species, we saw that the botanical gardens, again, shows the highest values of the specialist species or very important species in our habitat, and the most endangered species when we are changing the habitat characteristics with the urbanization. Then they are also more abundant in the woodlands, but they are very threatened, and they are in a very low number in the urban parks. In the case of generalist species, also the botanical gardens is showing the highest values, but in this case, generalist species shows the lowest values in the woodlands, or the most similar habitats to the natural habitats here in Poland. Then, when checking the ants and the spiders communities, another bioindicator group, we saw the same trend that we found in the case of the ants. And the community assemblages are also linked to the different management of our granaries. In the same case of species richness, we saw also that the botanical gardens is hosting the highest values of species, followed by the woodlands, and finally the parks. But there was not significant differences between the parks and the woodlands. And again, in urban parks, we found invasive species, in this case, the Mermesus trilobatus. When focusing again in the bioindicator character of our species, the same trend that in ants is found in spiders. So botanical gardens with highest number of microhabitats are showing a higher values in both specialist and generalist species. But urban forest or urban woodlands are the second in the case of specialist species, but it's not happening the same with generalist species, which one more time are taking advantage of the urban parks, these homogeneous habitats. And finally, we test the differences in the Harvestmen. But in this case, this group are very linked to these anthropogenic settlements and anthropogenic habitats. And this is reflected in our results, where there is no differences in the species assemblages between the habitat, the different type of managements in the habitats, and there is also no differences in species richness. And again, we found invasive species. So in general, our results show, or our study show how the urban parks are one of the bridges to arrive for the arrival of invasive species to new location and the characteristic of these habitats by reducing the natural species or the native species and the specialist species, which are great competitors in their natural habitats, is favoring the establishment of the invasive species, and of course is giving advantages to these generalized species with a higher ecological plasticity. And which is more important, our results highlight the importance of changing the structure of the management plans or the structure of our urban parks. And and we insist in the importance of creating different microhabitats, but of course, using as much as possible, or if possible, only native plants, which favors not only a larger number of microhabitats and reduce the cost of the maintenance of our plants, of our gardens, but also is facilitating the establishment and survival of our native and specialist species. And in this case, we reduce the risk of invasions, and also we ensure the conservation of our biodiversity in these artificial habitats, as they are the cities. And finally, I would like to present for first time my last project. We started to work on that this summertime, so I will show just general results and very preliminary results, not even choosing all the data because we were not on time. This project is focusing the effect of the urban heat island effect on the ant foraging activity. The urban heat island consists in the recording higher temperatures within the city than on the outlying areas. This is the result of one increase of the heat release from the buildings and the roads, which is not the same that the heat release from the trees, for example, or some other natural landscape, like the water bodies or the forest. And also this increase of the temperatures within the city are the result of a lower airflow than in the natural habitats, where we do not have these buildings blocking the airflow. So taking into account this situation, and also that our ants are totally, the activity of our ants are totally linked to the temperatures, I hypothesize that the annual activity starts earlier in the cities than in the natural habitats, but also the daily activity change and starts earlier and finishes later in the cities and in natural habitats. And this is actually one advantage for those generalist species, or those species, even the invasive one, that are able to colonize the urban habitats. To carry out this study, I took my colleagues. Without them, it was impossible to do it. And we sampled 3 cities or 3 areas in Poland. In the north, Gdańsk, at the sea level, Warsaw in the middle, and Krakow at the south, in the south of Poland. In these 3 cities, we carry out pairwise sampling within the city, in one urban area within the city, and outside of the natural habitats with similar characteristics to find the same species. We were using Lassus niger mainly, and we were carrying out the sampling at the same time, not only in the same hours, but also at the same times. I will explain now. It was the same in 3 points in Gdańsk, in urban areas and natural areas, and in Warsaw. We went in nights, when the temperatures are decreasing and then increasing again. Because if I want to know when the foraging finishes and start again, I need to record the activity at the lowest temperatures. It has no sense to record it when we have the highest temperatures in all our species, or most of our species are active. We placed 2 transets of 10 groups of baits and recorded the number of ants of Lasius niger, also sometimes the other species like the myrmica or formica. And so we were recording all the number of workers that we found in the bites anytime we went there. And at the same time, we placed different thermohygrometers to check the humidity and the temperature at the ground level. So when analyzing the first sampling in general, we found, as it was expected, that the temperatures within the city are significantly higher than outside of the city in all 3 habitats. However, when I checked the activity, it wasn't at all what I expected. And in general, the activity was higher in the natural habitats. And checking in the different 3 locations, again, it was a higher activity during the night in the natural habitats, which is totally opposite, taking into account this temperature theory, temperature activity theory. When checking separately with the tuna bites, I found exactly the same. And the same situation was for the sugar baits. So there are different possibilities of this or explanation for this result, which is that the first thing is that we still do not have all the data analyzed. So maybe when we are using all the other half of the data, results can change. The second is that the differences in the temperatures are not too drastic between the 2 habitat sites. And during this sampling season, so maybe we have to move the sampling seasons earlier or later in the year, and to enhance these differences of temperatures and check and find better differences in the activity foraging, in the foraging activity. Also, it can be the result of the behavioral plasticity of our generalist species, Lasius niger. So even the case that they have less availability of resources in the natural habitats, they need to invest more and they need to prolong their foraging activity along the day in order to balance this deficit and to continue growing their colonies in a proper ratio. And it can be some other explanations, but right now we are just starting, so we don't know. Finally, I would like to thank to all my collaborators and institutions, some of them for involving me in their projects, like Magdalena Vitek, the head of the Solidago study, or Isra Mack, the head of the bark beetles and forest study, and of course, all of them for helping me in the sampling and development of my projects, because without them it's impossible to do it, including Maida. She was every day working with me in the field. And also to all the institutions for allowing us to make the sampling and funding our research, some of them, not all of them, unfortunately. And thank you for your attention. If you have some further questions, I can attend you in this email.
Thank you very much, Gema. Yes, we have a couple of questions from the assistant to the talk. From Shin Zerda, he wants to parabenize. He wants to congratulate for your nice talk, and his question is: in how many different sites, geographic sites, did you study the bark beetles infestation and wood and effects? Only in Poland?
Okay, this study was carried out from a latitudinal gradient from South Hungary to North Poland. So we cover a total of 900 kilometers, 63 hectares, and it was it was carried out in 12 different points, 12 different forests. Some of them there in Hungary, some others in Czech Republic, and some others in Dansk. We check in total more than 360 Formica polyctena nests and more than 3,500 infested trees.
Thank you very much. Teresa Boquete also has another question. She also wants to congratulate you. And she says, is it possible that the higher investment in ingenious, in invaded meadows, will somehow help the ants escaping the invaded meadows, which might be less suitable for them?
Yeah, actually, this is one of our conclusions. So if I'm investing in workers, I'm investing in growing the colony, which is which has no sense in one unsuitable habitat, because I cannot have a proper food resources or a proper habitat characteristics. So finally, I will die sooner or later. But investing in giants is more expensive, but they can fly. And when they are flying, they are founding the colonies in a new habitat. And usually they are going to find or try to find a more suitable one. So this is ensuring the future of our genes. So yeah, actually this is one of our conclusions, and we think that this is more probable, this situation.
Thank you very much. Here we have another question from Elena Angulo. The question is, she says, so, thanks for the talk. About the ant communities in parks, you showed some invasive species of ants and spiders. Were there differences in their richness among the 3 parks? Were there more differences in botanic gardens? So, do you want me to repeat the question?
Yep, please.
So, talking about the ant communities in parks, she wants to know whether there were differences in species richness among the 3 parks that you studied. I think that she wants to say the 3 types of parks, right?
The 3 types of granaries. Okay, there was differences in species richness between the 3 types. Usually the highest differences was between the botanical gardens or the woodlands and the urban parks. So urban parks are always showing the lowest species richness, but only in the case of ants and spiders, which are the real bioindicator groups. Because as I said, the harvestmen are very linked to are very anthropophilic species in general. So they are totally linked to human settlements and facilities, and we didn't find any differences. But the other groups are bioindicators. So it means that when you are changing the habitat characteristics, they are disappearing. When you are having one habitat with a low number of microhabitat, with a low number of nesting sources or feeding sources in general, they are decreasing and they are disappearing. So yeah, there was a difference in the species richness among the 3 habitat types. There was between the botanical gardens and the woodlands, 2 totally different habitats, one very anthropophilic, but with a higher number of microhabitat, and the other very natural or closest to the natural characteristics. But the highest difference was always with the urban parks, where we even found the invasive species. The other 2 didn't show the presence of invasive species. Only this ant, but it was 1 worker, and that's it. We didn't find anything. They were not established.
That is a very interesting synthesis, Gema. I also wanted to ask you about this new project in which you are starting. Your hypothesis seems to me that they're going to, if they are corroborated, they are going to benefit somehow the foraging time of ants, right? But couldn't it happen the opposite with some other species of ants, like species of ants for which they're going to become the temperatures are going to be too high, maybe even in that initially cold region?
Yeah, actually, well, this is just a pilot project. So it was just for testing if it's working, and also to adjust the methodology and so on. But this is actually the main idea. when you are checking in natural habitats and in this urban one, if you are taking into account all the other results of the other studies, the urban habitats are very suitable, but for generalist species, and those one very easy to adapt to new conditions. The same is happening with the other anthropogenic habitats, with the anthropization, like it is happening with the Solidago. But those specialists, those one more linked to the different microhabitat and conditions of the natural habitats, they are disappearing in urban, or they have less chances in urban areas. So this is a biodiversity loss. But then if you have this heat island effect, which is favoring because it's enlarging the time for foraging, the time for providing food sources and growing their colonies, the generalistic species, the generalist species, which are in a perfect place or suitable place for them, these are anthropogenic places, they are favored by the place, but also for the larger time of foraging, for a larger activity, which grows significantly their colonies. However, these specialist species, they are not favored by the habitat, and they are in numerical disadvantage. So they have higher competitors, and this is much more difficult to overcome than in normal conditions. In the nature, where the nature usually are keeping the balance, and they are and somehow regulating all of these interspecific competitions. But also for not only for the generalistic species, these invasive species, if they are in a natural, in these urban areas, they are already pushing out our native species. And they have like 10 times the production rate or the growing rate that we have in our native species, because they are polydomous. We are also a very high rate of productions because they have so many queens and so on producing at the same time. If they also have a larger time for foraging and for developing their broods, because the broods are linked also, the brood development is also linked to temperatures, and also a larger time for provisions, they are very benefited for the situation. So this is like a second plane of a second part of our urbanization. But also, I was thinking in this idea as one small experiment of what we can expect with the climate change, because actually climate change is working in the same way, but in a larger level. So I would like to carry out this study, but checking at different levels, the different effects within the colonies and so on, also using more specialist species, because one of the problems I said that is maybe that I'm using right now the generalist species. And also I would like to check in different countries, because of course this effect is going to be totally different. For example, in South Spain, where we have stronger differences of temperatures, that if I'm working there in Warsaw, where differences are a bit more lower. No, they are not such a strong like in this other habitat.
Thank you very much. So I have yet another question from Elena Angulo. She says, I think that you have partially explained about this, but I think maybe you want to add more than this. She says, for the urban temperature study, could you compare one by one the activity for each species? Or maybe you already did that? Sorry, I didn't get it.
Like for this last project?
Yes.
I mean?
I think she's interested
in
comparing the time of activity that each species can have.
No, because now we wanted to know only the difference. So we are using the same species in the two habitat types. It has no sense to compare one Lassus niger with with different ecological requirements with the Myrmica rubra, for example, with different one. So you have to check the activity with the same species in the two habitat types. Of course, I would like to use different species and check, you know, one by one, the different species, or at least different species covering different ecological requirements, to see how they are responding to these differences in temperatures. But right now it was a very short pilot project, so it was impossible to do all that. And I actually could do it because my 4 collaborators, Ishma, Magda, and my 3 collaborators, Ishma, Magda, and Luca, we are really working so hard every night. And so it's, you need a larger time to do it. And unfortunately, I couldn't do it, and I hope to do it in the future.
Thank you very much, Gema. So I think that we don't have any other new questions. Do we have any questions from the assistants? No, I think that's it. But anyway, thank you very much. Please stay with us after I finish the streaming. Thank you very much to you again, Gema, and thank you everybody for connecting with us at the Seminarios EBD. We hope to find you again in the next week, in Saturday. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.